The 113th Congress has been called by some as the least productive Congress in American history, with the fewest number of laws passed of any Congress in the modern era.
If the last Congress was the least productive ever, this year's is living up to the name. With less than 10 days to go on this year's legislative calendar, the Republican-led House and Democratic-controlled Senate have
According to the
quite
Washington
to-do
Post,
list.
this Congress, our 113th Congress, is on its way to becoming the least productive Congress in modern history.
But Republican House Speaker John Boehner has shrugged off the criticism, blaming the Democratic-led Senate instead.
It is time for the other chamber to get serious about getting this work finished.
The Senate has continued to reject our offers, but under the Constitution, there's a way to resolve this process, and that is to go to conference and talk through your differences.
The 113th United States Congress. Bad at creating jobs. Good at creating parking spaces at strange historical monuments in the middle of nowhere.
What causes gridlock like this? Is it a result of stubborn party line voting or lack thereof? Is it a function of weak leadership or a broken system? We'll explore these questions in the context of leadership and what it means to lead in a complex system like the House of Representatives. We'll focus on two speakers of the House, Joseph Cannon and Newt Gingrich, examining their approaches to the position and how leadership in the House has changed over time. Leadership in the United States Congress is a much different system than that of leadership in a church, business, or social organization. Not only must legislators have the social skills necessary to convince others to put in their votes, but they must also have the knowledge of the intricate political system in which they are working. With every vote, congressmen and women are forced to choose who to most closely represent, their constituencies, their parties, or their ideologies. In addition, the United States system of government is markedly different from many of its European counterparts because of the separation between the legislative and executive branches. This deprives the legislature of one unifying personality to push legislation through. In the House of Representatives, the power and responsibility fall on the shoulders of the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House has the responsibility of leading the formal day-to-day procedures of the House, but also pushing forward legislation. Since the Speaker is not required to be politically neutral, he typically takes the side of his own party, helping along bills that mesh with his ideology, potentially stalling those that don't. This procedural power can be abused, as is seen in the case of Joseph G. Cannon. Cannon was the Speaker of the House for the 58th through 61st Congresses from 1905 to 1911, until he was ousted from power by a faction of his own party. Pre-1911, the House of Representatives had a very centralized system with the Speaker at the seat of power. Cannon used his procedural abilities, like the ability to appoint committee heads, to delay legislation indefinitely. Known as a czar speaker, Cannon disagreed with many of Teddy Roosevelt's policies, and he abused his powers as Speaker to prevent them from becoming law. At first, he was uncontested, using a combination of coercion and bribery to keep his party in line. However, in 1910, a joint effort by Democrats and an insurgent Republican faction took Cannon down through the manipulation of constitutional loopholes in what would become known as the Revolt Against the Speaker. Following the revolt, the power of the Speaker of the House declined substantially, and lawmakers were forced to adapt, creating the form of leadership most commonly used today, bargaining, also known as brokering or transactional leadership. While Cannon's style of leadership was very authoritarian and top-down, in the modern era, leadership in the House tends to be more participative. In order to gain authority and pass bills, leaders must form alliances with other legislators, with interest groups, and committees, trading favors and loyalties. What explains this dramatic shift in leadership style? Some scholars follow a more context-based approach to the dilemma, proposing that strong authoritarian leadership emerges in a time of need or crisis, when parties are polarized on issues and party line voting is high. These strong leaders articulate majority-held goals and ideals, giving them a transformational edge to their power. When party cohesion is weak and no unifying crisis exists is when the transactional style of leadership thrives. For the most part, this contextual theory, also known as principal-agent theory, seems to fit. However, some scholars point out the few major exceptions to the principal-agent theory, one of which is Newt Gingrich. Gingrich was the Speaker of the House for the 104th and 105th Congresses from 1995 to 1999. He was the first Republican Speaker in 40 years and gained his majority by a slim 22 people. Gingrich was an exception to the bargaining rule. According to Stephen Smith and Gerald Gamm, Newt Gingrich quickly and deservedly became known as the most assertive speaker since Cannon. Building strong alliances from the start and articulating major goals, what he called the contract with America, Gingrich asserted himself in a role seemingly unfit for the political environment at the time.
Here is Connie Chung.
Good evening. The Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, Newt Gingrich of Georgia, is about to make an unprecedented address to the nation, marking the fulfillment of the so-called contract with America. It's the first time the Speaker of the House has asked for television time since television was invented, a sign of the dramatic shift in political power that began when the Republicans won back the Congress 5 months ago tomorrow.
In truth, he was able to do so because he created the context in which an authoritarian, even transformational leader could thrive. Gingrich is quoted comparing himself to previous speakers, saying, "They had been essentially legislative leaders. I, on the other hand, was essentially a political leader, seeking to do nothing less than reshape the federal government along with the political culture of the nation." He brought up party line votes and unified the Republican Party under his ends-focused contract with America, underlining how much of a determining factor personality can be. However, the legislative turnout under Gingrich was the lowest in history at the time, almost as low as the now record-breakingly ineffective 113th Congress.
I would have to say that John Boehner has handled the run-up to this better than I did. I was too willing to close the government.
In fact, the 1996 shutdown was politically disastrous for Republicans. 2 years later, Newt Gingrich was out of Congress while President Clinton's numbers had rebounded.
The House has since reverted back to its accustomed brokering leadership. However, the system is no longer working. With party divisions now so strong, perhaps an equally strong leader must emerge. Leadership in the House is a combination of circumstance and sheer will. It's a mutually impacting process. Circumstances in the House lead to the emergence of a certain leadership style, which then impacts the entire operational atmosphere of the House. Is there one most effective style of leadership for the House of Representatives? It all depends on the complex relationship between the individual and his or her legislative peers, as well as the social and economic context of the time.